And good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to our first Discuss with Russ webinar. I'm Russell Rivera, founder and president of Voice Wealth Management. I'm a chartered financial analyst, certified financial planner, and I work typically with young professionals, entrepreneurs, and their families in trying to help them make the most out of their money. I work as a personal CFO and financial therapist, as I call it. And, thank you for joining us today once again. And the purpose of this webinar series is to obviously help you cope during the crisis that we're dealing with, help you think about the issues aside from what's going on outside our houses and trying to make sure we work from day to day, but also to help you get thinking about issues you can pay attention to now while you have extra time, and get you thinking about what you can do now to set yourself up to be ready for after the crisis. And so to get us started, I'm very proud to have with us David Stern of Matthew & Stern. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about him. David Stern received his BA from Vassar College in 2002 and his JD from New York Law School in 2007. He's worked in real estate and as an independent financial planner prior to practicing law. Since 2016, he's focused professionally on legal matters, and particularly estate planning. After having his own law office for 3 years, he and Sean Matthey merged their practices into Matthey & Stern, Attorneys at Law, in 2019, where they focus on trusts and estates and small business advising. In addition to his work with Matthey & Stern, David loves spending time with his wife and cat, reading, watching Cleveland sports teams, and volunteering with the Vassar Club of New York, where he serves as treasurer. So David, thank you for joining us today. Good to see you this afternoon. We've seen each other a lot over the last couple of days prepping for this, but again, thanks for joining us. And I want to start really by asking stuff about going on with the crisis. So with the crisis going on, I would imagine that some people might be looking at their estate plans again. So let me ask you, who should most consider revisiting their estate plan at this time?
Well, thanks again for having me. So this might be a trick answer, but certainly the first people that should take a look at their estate plan are people who have not done anything with their estate plan. Technically speaking, everybody has an estate plan, whether they've gotten documents put in place or not. It's just a matter of whether that's the plan that New York State has chosen for them, or it's the one that they've chosen for themselves by getting either a will or trust. So people should initially get something in place. If people have already put something in place, then I look at life events as great times to revisit those documents and look to see if any changes need to be made. Things like having children, getting married, purchasing real estate, retiring, significant changes in income, getting an inheritance. All of those have significant financial shifts in a person's life that tend to need to be accompanied by a revisiting of somebody's estate plan.
And I realize I have to take it back a second. We've talked about what estate planning is, but you're an attorney, and when I think of estate planning from my background, I think about wills, I think about trusts, I think about those things. Obviously, those aren't the only parts of an estate plan. We could talk about elements other things that we can use to execute it, like insurance or just even beneficiary designations on accounts. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what a will and a trust is, or wills and trusts, and the legal documents people would need as part of their estate plan, and why they most often come and see you?
Sure. So a will is a document that a person uses in order to pass the assets that they own when they pass away. There are other ways to pass assets, but that's the one that most people tend to use. Trusts similarly can be used to pass assets. Trusts, at least revocable trusts, are often referred to as will substitutes. They simply work differently. A will isn't relevant until a person dies, at which point the person named in the will as the executor takes the will to surrogates court. They petition the court for the authority to administer the estate. And then once they get that, they collect all the deceased assets, they pay any outstanding debts, distribute them in accordance with the terms of the will, and then can close out the estate. Whereas a trust is an ongoing vehicle. In some ways, it operates sort of like a corporation. It holds assets, and so it can be an operation while you're alive. It then can help you transition through your death into seamlessly passing assets to whomever you want to, and that's how those work.
Very good, thank you. So one of the things that, obviously in this time of disruption, a lot of people have been concerned about, oh, I haven't done anything in a while. I don't have a will, or I have some childcare issues or elder care issues that I want to take on and deal with at this time. But legal processes are to some extent shut down, right? Courts are more or less closed. So if someone isn't sort of legal process, maybe they started something, maybe they want to start something, how can that proceed right now? And if someone did want to have some sort of document redone, how is that filing process handled?
So the court gets involved with things like probate or estate administration when somebody passes away, guardianship issues, both of children, the elderly, property. And in terms of those things right now, I don't have a lot of guidance. Frankly, the courts are closed and there's unfortunately not really anything to be done. I'm in the middle of a few different proceedings that are just sort of on hold, and we're waiting to hear what can be done. In terms of planning, putting wills or trusts in place, doing things like healthcare proxy and living wills, powers of attorney, which I'm being asked quite a bit about these days. The governor has issued executive orders that allow us to put those things in place. Wills are witnessed by two people. The witnesses sign an affidavit, which is then notarized. Trusts are notarized. Healthcare proxies are witnessed. So there's new guidelines that allow us to do virtual notarization through live video, live witnessing through video. And while the procedure is a little bit annoying, it's certainly better than having nothing in place. And so we're doing the best that we can.
Sure, fair enough. So I recently read somewhere that the average age of a will or other, will trust document is about 11 years old. What are the signs that someone should look for that they should redo some or all of their estate planning documents? Aside from, I know you specifically mentioned
life events.
Yeah, to life events, yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, I think that the life events really are those major times that you want to revisit. I think also maybe I failed to mention changes in legislation, certainly with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that had a huge impact on the federal estate tax and gift tax exemptions. So depending on the wealth of an individual, those sorts of things could have tremendous impacts on the amount of money that can be passed without paying substantial amounts of tax, and then the strategies employed in order to achieve those goals. Also, I think, changes in a person's family. Sometimes, young couples with very young children maybe name their parents as guardians, but then as they're getting older, so are their parents. And so whether or not having an elderly parent as a guardian is appropriate, it's a subjective thing, but I think everyone would agree that you probably need a lot of energy to handle young children, and maybe being elderly isn't the best time to be doing that sort of thing. So another good time to revisit who should be guardian, something like that.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So Dave, I kind of have got a follow-up question here, specifically regarding from one of our viewers, specifically regarding some issues now. What's being done with families that you know of that have had people pass during the pandemic, both with wills and without?
So I guess the simple answer is I have not heard any firsthand accounts on what is happening. So I can't directly answer that question, unfortunately. The fact is, in terms of probating, they're not going to be able to probate the estate right now. Frankly, most people don't immediately go to initiate probate anyway. Most families have a grieving process. It's difficult after losing a family member to immediately then want to move into the court process of moving assets. I do think that, burial is probably a bigger issue, and I'd have to imagine that funeral homes are very busy. In fact, I remember hearing stories about funeral homes sort of being overrun right now. So at least people are able to take care of the burial of their loved ones, which I think is certainly important. And then eventually when they go to administer the estate, whether they have a will or not, that's when that'll become relevant. And I think eventually the courts will either reopen because we've reached a safe and healthy society, or they'll figure out some workaround to maybe put more of the surrogates court in the e-court system and allow things to be done remotely.
Fair enough. Thank you. So, in my role in what I do as a financial planner, I recently had an issue with trying to get beneficiaries their money because many designated beneficiaries had predeceased the account owner. So issues like that, how often should someone revisit those? I mean, we talked about life events, but there might be other times to revisit them despite having that situation.
Yeah.
I may have cut out there for a minute if you had trouble hearing that question.
Yeah, no problem. Not to make light of it, but certainly if a beneficiary's passed away, somebody should update that sort of thing. I mean, I hear all sorts of stories like that. People getting who have been divorced who never updated documents. In fact, one of the craziest estate administration cases I've ever worked on was one where a person was the second spouse with a child of the second marriage, where there had been a first marriage with a child of the first marriage. And despite the deceased having known that they had cancer for some years and that it was going to be terminal, they never updated beneficiary designations on retirement accounts. And so second spouse and child were disinherited out of a substantial amount of money. So, I think that, anytime there's a new child born, anytime people are married, divorced, those sorts of family dynamic changes should be accompanied by reviews, as well as when a person puts in place their estate planning documents, because those documents have to be coordinated with the beneficiaries on the account to make sure that everything is going to the right place.
And I realize, and of course that's super important, right? Like, obviously I mentioned my story, but I think about now that you have other issues as well, like the Secure Act, right? Before all this happened, December, January, February, I was really concerned about what was happening with the Secure Act. So for those of you who don't know, in December, Congress passed new legislation on how to, or essentially rules on IRA accounts and kind of how those pass on for people dying in 2020 and later. So how have you been, looking at the Secure Act, and how's that affecting you and your clients and the advice that you give them?
So, frankly, I haven't gotten too much into that yet. I tend to leave the tax issues to a person's accountant or their financial advisor to coordinate. But on an individual client level, if somebody brings to me specific questions like that, or when I'm reviewing accounts, I will raise it with their accountant, or I want to be in contact with somebody's accountant or advisor to make sure that those professionals are giving the proper advice so that I can do the right planning based on that advice.
Fair enough. I know for me, one of the things I've been looking at and trying to find solutions, for people, right? Because not that it had come up yet, but now it's people things where maybe something that had fallen by the wayside because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, like a life insurance trust, may now come back into mode because people are going to be looking for ways to use, to avoid taxation or defer taxation, those kinds of things where they can come back into your area. Have you seen something like life insurance trusts maybe in the last few months, or do you think that's something that's a little too soon to have come up against as people were digesting that legislation?
Oh, well, I don't, the way I approach planning is very individual. So, I talk to people, they'll tell me what their assets are, both the amount and in what form. And then those are just variables that impact all aspects of planning. So, if somebody has an outsized life insurance policy that is going to trigger either the state or federal estate tax, then I'm going to want to do planning to try to take that out of the estate so that they're not subject to that liability. In the same way that I would look at any kind of outsized asset that might have that impact and try to figure out what kind of strategy or tactic I might be able to employ to do that sort of thing.
Very good. Thank you. Since we're talking about legislation and we are talking about estate planning and the CARES Act, let's pivot a little and start talking about the CARES Act. And I think one of the things as a small business owner, as a financial advisor, for myself is that's been frustrating is, we're finding out new things every day. You have new guidance coming out all the time. For some people who may have applied for EIDL or PPP loans, again, this week, you may have gotten an email in the last couple of days about how they're handling these things. So as a partner in a small business, what's your experience been so far versus your understanding of what's supposed to happen?
Yes. Well, those are two very different things. So initially my understanding was that small businesses could apply to both. They could apply for the economic injury disaster loans. The first $10,000 of that was supposed to turn into a grant. And then separately, you could apply under the PPP for a loan that also could convert into a grant, depending, presuming that you used 75% of that on payroll expenses and the rest of it was going to other certain administrative expenses, and that the PPP loan purpose and the disaster loan purpose were different purposes. So like PPP goes to replace payroll and economic disaster goes towards mortgage or rent payments and utility payments. And so in theory, that was supposed to make it so that you could get both and both would convert to grants largely. What we've heard recently in terms of the economic injury disaster loans, from the email you referenced from the SBA, is that everybody's not getting that instead what they're looking to do is give $1,000 per employee for companies. I'm unclear personally on whether an employee counts partners in a partnership, for instance. There's been little guidance on that. The things I'm reading seem to suggest that they would, but I'm not sure. There's not a lot of communication beyond that mass email that everybody seems to have gotten. The PPP is a whole other story. The Friday that they launched it, that they said that people were going to be able to apply, I went to our banking website and there was a questionnaire available. I filled it out and submitted it. On Monday, that questionnaire was gone and was replaced with the actual application without any word from them. I'd just seen in the news that this was a thing that was happening. Then tried to fill that out and submit it, but it was glitchy, where literally flaws in the coding made it impossible to submit the application. The next day, tried again. It had been fixed. I submitted it, and message said that someone was going to get back to me in 3 to 5 days. I've yet to have anybody follow up with me about that. In the meanwhile, from other professionals that I've relationships with, I've heard stories of certain clients starting to get either the $10,000 getting deposited in their accounts for the disaster loans, people getting the PPP loans. So it's an unsatisfying answer, but I'm hearing a wide variety of different experiences. And I'm not certain of the cause. I know that, the disaster loans, you go directly through the SBA website if you're applying to that, whereas the PPP, you go to your own bank. And so perhaps each individual bank has a different set of procedures that's causing whatever either good or bad things are happening. Obviously, people are largely working from home, and that can be causing part of the problem. But frankly, I just hope that it gets sorted out soon and that people are able to get the funding that they need to keep their businesses in place.
And is there a website that you know of, and I'll have more questions, but is there like a website that the government's put out that you could share with us here in case people don't already know it? I mean, I went there, I'm sure you went there. Do you know what it is offhand?
A government website that has all the information?
Yeah, or at least where people can go to apply if they still haven't.
Oh, so for the disaster loans, you go to sba.gov, and I can't remember what the other, sub menus are, but if you look through the sba.gov website, or even just go to Google and type in SBA economic injury disaster loans, it'll come up. You want to click on the one that links through the SBA. In terms of the PPP, you want to go to your own bank, and your bank is going to have the information for you on applying for that.
Great. And so what else, what else do people need when they're applying, right? Because you've gone through the process with your bank and through the government. What other documentation is necessary? What should people expect as they go through the process?
So it's been a couple of weeks, and even in that time, I've started to forget. But my recollection from the disaster loan is they asked questions about maybe your gross revenue, certainly personal information, but it was pretty surface level information for the disaster loan. The PPP was more in depth. After also adding some of that personal information, there's the calculations for how they determine what you are eligible to apply for, which is effectively 2.5. Well, it depends on how long the business has been working, and so different time periods to assess the amount of money that you might be entitled to apply for. But effectively, it was 2.5 times the monthly income, capped at an annualized rate of $100,000 a year per person. So it's capped at $83.33 per month per person. So you do that times 2.5 if everyone's making 100 grand or more. If it's less, it's 2.5 times that, and that plus there are certain other things you can also incorporate into the calculation. People should check on whatever the most recent guidance is. I don't even know offhand.
Fair
Beyond
enough.
that, they then ask for certain IRS tax forms. So people should be in touch with their accountants. I've found that accountants have the best information, and people should talk to their accountants on how best to apply and on completing some of those tax forms that seem to be necessary.
Fair enough. So let's assume you go apply for a loan, get a loan. You've had one. We come out of this on the other side. What is your understanding on how you might need to pay back loans?
So, as I said, to a large extent, this money is meant to convert into grants. So anything that does convert to a grant, then of course doesn't have to be repaid. In terms of repayment, People should work closely with their accountants and financial advisors because those are the professionals best equipped to understand the cash flow and business prognosis for whatever particular industry the business is in, to understand how they're going to be able to pay it back. The terms seem to be set for the PPP. I think you can defer for 6 months. It's a 1% rate, and the maturity is 2 years. Whereas for the disaster loan, I think above the 10 grand, it's 3.75% for businesses, 2.75% for nonprofits. You can defer that for a year, and then it's a 30-year maturity. So again, like the specific strategy on how people will pay it back really is going to depend on every individual business's cash flow and how they see their future looking.
Fair enough. I guess the other question that kind of dovetails along with that is, you brought up not knowing whether or not a business owner is counted as an employee or not. I think that's a really important thing. Everything I've read makes me think that they are. Because again, if we've, as a business owner, you've lost your income, you should be entitled to get some sort of recompense because you're under the same thing as your employees might be. But you never know. But beyond that would be thinking, how would this get charged to the business owner? So, and I know you're not a tax lawyer, and I'm not either. And I've even talked to some accountants saying, well, if I were to get my $10,000 PPP or EIDL and I paid myself, and I'm just a sole prop and it goes into my account and I take it as I want, and I might owe tax on it. What do I, like those are all questions that I think are still yet to be worked out. And the tax lawyers I know don't have the answers. So sure. I think we're learning something every day, and we'll try to do, I think here on Discuss with Russ, we'll try to do another one of these in a few weeks when we have more visibility and more answers. Let me ask, we've talked a lot about business owners and sole proprietors and freelancers who, right? Sole proprietors and freelancers, that's what's different about this is that those people are also eligible for these as opposed to just corporations, which in the past was the issue, right? Right, David? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything that I've missed that individuals should be looking at in terms of what they may get out of the CARES Act? Again, we talked about businesses, business owners, but what if you're an individual? What benefits came to you out of that?
So the CARES Act also expanded the way unemployment benefits operate. So it extended, I think, by 3 months, the length of time that people can receive benefits. It supplements whatever the state authorizes for unemployment, an additional $600, I believe.
That's per week, right?
Yeah, per paycheck. And from my sister, who's applied for that, I've heard that is not yet being paid out, but it's supposed to be retroactive to when you applied. So in theory, she'll be getting that at some point in the future. Then there's also what's called pandemic unemployment assistance, which is a supplement to the group of people who qualify for unemployment. So typically unemployment is supposed to just be for people who have lost their job. I don't know a ton of details about it, so I don't want to say anything that's not true, but there is a degree to which the pandemic unemployment assistance expands the pool of people who qualify to receive that benefit.
Yeah, and I've had to take some look into that as well. For example, I've had somebody I've worked with who was on the verge of getting a new job, actually in city government, and now as a result of this, that job is probably gone away because there's just no budget for it. And the extent that he may qualify for additional unemployment benefits as a result of that, I've asked them to look into it. It's just the way to do it because, again, that's the situation. And I felt bad for this person because they'd been sitting there for months waiting for a start date. It's just the way city government works. Yeah. So yeah, I hear you. And I think I've had conversations with other clients about whether or not they should ask their employer to go on unemployment because their employer cut their salary or cut their time by 20% to kind of float through. But then I was like, well, you might be better off getting laid off, but if they get PPP, you have to, right, that conversation can continue between an employee and an employer to make sure that everybody benefits the most, whatever that might look like. So I don't know, have you had those conversations? And again, I know you're dealing with business owners on the business side and the business planning side. Have you or your colleagues have conversations, those types of conversations with your clients?
Yeah, so I haven't, and I don't know that my partner has had those specific kinds of conversations, but I've heard of those conversations where business owners have to make the decision about whether to keep people or not. And from the employee's perspective, in a sense, sort of conspiring, while thinking about whether it makes more sense for the person to be fired so that they can get that benefit. But then, as you say, the PPP incentivizes keeping the people. It's, again, there's very little guidance, or I guess I should say there seems to be little in common between what I am hearing from our government about how this is working and how it is in fact working. And so that makes it difficult to give proper advice, because without all the information, how can you possibly put together a thorough plan? So I advise people to be honest when they're applying for government benefits, both because it's the right thing to do and because you don't want to commit fraud against the government. You also don't want to take money from people who really, really need it. Of course, everybody has to make money to pay bills, and everybody's wealth looks different from everyone else's. But at the same time, you don't want to try to game the system. And I think that, I don't know, I think the best advice to give is to just look honestly at your circumstances. If you can keep employees and there's a good prognosis for the viability of your business, then keep them, and ideally PPP money comes in, and then you benefit from having kept your employees. If people may benefit from being put on unemployment, then that's an individual decision, but I certainly would not advise an employer to fire somebody because that person then may make more money being on unemployment.
Well, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but I know that was an issue in coming up with the legislation. There was a last-minute attempt by some of the Republican senators to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to at least look at this, because we don't want to incentivize that, because they were recognizing that with some of the unemployment structures in place, the way the legislation was written, some people could make more on unemployment, and they didn't want to do that. That was eventually not made part of the legislation, but I know that was at least discussed at the time within Congress as this was being worked out.
Yeah, I heard about that too. I guess all I can say about that is that I've never seen credible data that suggests that unemployment benefits incentivize people or disincentivize people from working. Mm-hmm. And so this seems to be this perpetually existing myth to suggest that people, once they're not working, are going to want to stay on unemployment. Well, as a person that stayed home for the last month, I want to go somewhere. I would love to go to my office. I'm sure lots of people want to go to work, both to get out of the house and because people fundamentally want to be productive. There is a great feeling in work ethic. And so, it would be great if that was recognized when legislation was being drawn up to try to help people.
Very good. I want to thank Alan for his comment. His just so everybody here One of our viewers has said, I believe the SBA came out with guidance last night that partners and firms should include their self-employment income capped at 100,000 into the average monthly payroll calculation and cannot apply as self-employed individuals. So at least at the very least, it tells maybe that's a little bit more guidance on how people should do it. Obviously, that's from one of our viewers, and you should speak to your professional advisors yourself to whether it's your bank or your attorney or your accountant on how you should do that. But just that's shared with us from
Thank you, Alan.
from one of our viewers. So thank you. So any final words? Anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to thought was important for our viewers and listeners to know?
Not a fan. I thought this was great. I hope everybody is safe and healthy. Obviously, this is a confusing and potentially frightening time. Very uncertain what's going to happen over the coming months. But I think if people act in good faith, talk to their trusted professionals, that we can all get through this as best as we could hope to.
Great. If there are any more questions in the next few seconds, again, I have, you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A function. Beyond that, how can we reach out to you, David?
Oh, well, people could check out our firm website is matheyandstern.com. That's matheyandstern.com. My personal email is david@matheyandstern.com. I'm always happy to try to be helpful, answer whatever questions I can myself, connect people to others who may know more than me. And yeah, we're all in this together. So happy to be helpful.
Great, thank you. And for those of you who are listening and are in the mood for another Discuss with Russ webinar, we are going to be doing one at 3 o'clock, effectively communicating with video conferencing. Our guest will be Miles Cutler. So talking about, for all of us who are now doing the Zoom thing as we're doing right now, just trying to figure out how to talk with people better. And maybe I'll learn to look into the camera a little bit more rather than looking at David's picture on the screen. If you'd like to participate, just put yourself in the, just put your emails and in the comments and I'll send you the link separately. Send it in the Q&A or in a chat to myself. And I will make sure to send you that invite and add you to our list for other future webinars, which includes on April 22nd, we'll have Staying Mentally and Physically Fit While Social Distancing. Our guests will be Lisa Snow of On the Mend Customized Fitness and Massage, and Amy Salomon, founder of The Wellness Map. And on April 29th, we're going to be discussing New York real estate before, during, and after the COVID-19 crisis with Mike Barella of Compass Real Estate. So, and that will be on both of those, April 22nd and 29th, will be at 2 p.m. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you hopefully at 3 o'clock.